Welcome to a Zeteo live town hall for paid Zeteo subscribers. Welcome to you all. Thank you for your support for Zeteo. We have a very important conversation today. My guest from Israel is Dr. Ofer Cassif, who is a member of the Israeli parliament, has been a member of the Israeli parliament for 5 years. He's a member of the Hadash party, which is an Arab Jewish party, the Democratic Front for Equality and Peace. It's a left-wing party. And what happened to Dr. Cassif this month, what happened to Ofer, is something we're going to talk about because he's been suspended this month from the Israeli parliament because of the stance he's taken in favor of Palestinian freedom and against genocide. 6-month suspension, your wages docked. Ofer Cassif, how are you feeling right now?
Personally, I'm okay, apart from the agony over the death toll everywhere, especially in Gaza. But politically, the situation is very grave. When it's in a continuous escalation, I'm afraid that we are just in the beginning of this deterioration towards deep in the abyss. Actually, we are already deep in the abyss. We began to sink in the mud. And the question is when our noses are going to be beneath the mud as well. So wow. The situation is very grave, very dangerous, and very explosive, as it were.
Yes, and let's talk about that. Israel is currently bombing Gaza, it's bombing Lebanon, it's bombing occasionally Syria and Iraq, it's bombed Iran, and of course in the West Bank, we hear a lot about Gaza in the occupied West Bank. There are settlers running amok backed by the Israeli military. But before we get to all that, a couple of things. Number one, just a reminder to our subscribers, hundreds of you in the chat, please do ask your questions in the chat. Obviously, I won't be able to take all your questions, but I'll try and ask as many as I can to Ofer today. But number two, why is Ofer here today? A very unique figure. Ofer, tell us what happened to you. Why were you suspended from the Israeli parliament? What did you do that upset the entire Israeli political establishment?
I can say what I didn't do. I didn't align with the hegemonic pro-genocide thugs in the coalition, and unfortunately among the opposition as well. So I try to explain in a nutshell because it's a long story. But first and foremost, I expressed the views I hold and for which I was elected. I try to represent the values that my movement cling to and believe in. And I try to represent the best I can with my comrades and friends, the public who voted for us. So, and we are against the occupation. We are against the genocidal massacre that Israel has been carrying out in Gaza for over a year. At the same time, by the way, we were totally against, with no reservation, of the massacre committed by Hamas, because we are against any kind and any act that harm one way or another, let alone kills innocent civilians. But
Ofer, you mentioned
sorry.
Sorry, I just want to jump in and say something grabbed my attention. I want to ask a question from one asker. You said we are against occupation, we are against genocide. The we is not very big, though, in Israel, is it right now? I was Googling you earlier, and I know you signed a petition against genocide. You signed a petition supporting the South African genocide case. And only a few hundred Israelis have done that, right? No other Israeli Jewish members of parliament. Yes. I mean, in terms of Jewish members of the Israeli parliament, I believe you're the only person to say the G word, genocide. It's what's pissed them off so much. You are in a tiny minority. And Karen D, one of our subscribers, asks, what percentage of the Israeli people would you say actually care about the genocide and the occupation of the Palestinian people and want both to end?
As far as the occupation is concerned, I dare say that there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, and others who opposed the occupation for many years, for decades. And this is one thing. As far as the genocide is concerned and other atrocities against the Palestinians, as you mentioned before, in the West Bank as well, including East Jerusalem, ethnic cleansing, etc., I believe that now there are many more than we could see months ago. Because we have to understand, that's not to justify it, but only to analyze and explain, and if you like, to describe the situation. Just after the massacre committed by Hamas, there was a lot of rage and anger and fear and frustration and among the Israelis, including among many who have been on the left side of the political spectrum, and they didn't care much. Many of them didn't care much about the fate of the Palestinians in Gaza. I think that changed. So I dare say that they are. It's never enough, but I dare say there are many thousands of Israelis or Israeli citizens, as I said, Palestinians for sure, but also Jews and others who are against the genocide. Unfortunately, there's a desperation and fear to take the streets. You can see people taking the streets, especially every weekend, but there are many more who are against the genocide, but they are afraid.
But even your optimistic assessment, Ofer, you say, I noticed you very carefully said thousands, many thousands. I mean, Israel is a country of many millions, right? Several million people. It's still a tiny minority. And just to add on a question from Zafar Mohammed, another subscriber who says, how many people in Israel properly oppose the genocide? He says, it sounds like many are happily endorsing it from the little news we see here from Israel. Ofer, you may not know, we made a film, Zeteo, called Israel's Real Extremism, where we actually went out and interviewed one of our production company called Basement Films, went out, sent a crew to Israel to interview some of the soldiers who've come back from Gaza, who filmed these TikToks, journalists, politicians. And there is a kind of, Diana Butu, who I'm sure you know, who's one of our contributors, she had this line about, genocide mania, genocide enthusiasm in Israeli society. Is that an exaggeration?
No, it's not an exaggeration. We have to distinguish between the hegemonic opinion and the anti-hegemonic bloc, if I can call it like that. The Israeli society is very polarized. So on the one hand, you can find those bigots, and there's no doubt that they constitute probably the majority at the moment. I cannot deny that. I wish I could. There are, unfortunately, millions, yes, that may endorse the ongoing genocide while they actually deny that there is a genocide. I was suspended because I dare say that there is a genocide goes on. But I have to say that because that's the truth. Even if I am suspended again, I cannot just lie. But at the same time, I'm sure that there are, perhaps there are even millions or a million who are against the genocide. The society is very polarized, but I do not deny, unfortunately, as I said, I cannot deny that the hegemonic view does support those atrocities. But it is dynamic. It might change. It is dynamic.
But that hegemonic view, of course, is bolstered by a crackdown on dissent. You mentioned earlier people don't want to come out on the streets. Sure. I believe in 2021, well before October the 7th, you were protesting and getting beaten on the streets by Israeli police as a member of parliament, right? I've seen pictures of you being assaulted in the streets. They tried to prevent you from becoming a member of parliament. I believe in 2019, you had to go to the Supreme Court because they didn't like the fact that you were criticizing the basis of the Jewish state, the Zionist basis.
Correct.
And what's interesting is we here in the West, the line all the time, the Middle East's only democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East. I wonder how you feel about that statement, given you are a member of the parliament who was removed for 6 months, docked pay, and I don't hear anyone in the US State Department or the British Foreign Office speaking up on your behalf for the Middle East's only democracy. How do you feel about that line, the Middle East's only democracy, given the situation you're in right now?
This is, if it wasn't that so sad, it would have been, a great joke, because, Israel is based on Jewish supremacy, if not in the sense of racial supremacism, like Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and a great part of the Likud do believe in racial supremacy. I'm talking about political supremacy. The state was established as a state that gives priority and privileges to Jews at the expense of others, primarily the indigenous Palestinians. Now, I want to be very clear. We support the two-state solution, and Hadash and myself, as part of Hadash, we do believe that Israel as a sovereign state has the right to exist in security, but it cannot use that security and that existence to discriminate against, let alone persecute, let alone kill other people and oppress other people. And I would say that Israel was born as an ethnocracy rather than a democracy. The problem is that nowadays, under this fascist government, and I have to say that this is a clear fascist government with racist components that dominate that coalition. And now the situation that was never, there was never equality, but now the situation is much worse, not only vis-a-vis the occupied Palestinian territories, Gaza, East Jerusalem, West Bank, but also within Israel proper. There is a political persecution, silencing, and people are afraid of a lot of violence by fascist mob and by the police, which turned into a private militia of Ben Gvir.
Yes. So I want to come back to two-state solution and Zionism and all of that stuff in a moment. There's a lot of questions about that. Just sticking with you for a moment, Eleanor Bouquet asks, what are the precedents? And apologies, Eleanor, if I've mispronounced your last name. I'm bad at pronunciations. But Eleanor says, what are the precedents for suspending members of parliament in Israel? Have there been other cases related to being able to speak freely? And just the other day, I saw your movement leader, Ayman Odeh, who is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, member of parliament, dragged off the stage by armed guards because he was speaking at the podium about the killings in Gaza, and the Speaker of the Knesset shut him down. So what is the precedent for silencing members of parliament?
Yeah. I mean, the excuse was that Ayman Odeh, appealed directly to Netanyahu, who was there at the plenum, and he said, you are a serial killer of peace. And once the chairperson heard the term serial killer, he didn't even want to hear the continuation of the sentence and just, kicked him out. That's not the first time that it happens either to Ayman or myself or other comrades. It happens from time to time, not solely to us, I must say. But as far as suspension is concerned, many times members of the Knesset were suspended, but never for 6 months. It could be, I was suspended last year, just after the October 7th, for 45 days, again, because I was talking about the genocide, about the assault on Gaza, I said that the government actually was interested in violence, etc. So I was suspended because of that. My friend and comrade, Aida Tuma Sliman, who is a Palestinian woman, citizen of Israel, as well member of Hadash, was suspended for 2 months. There are many examples, but since the establishment of the State of Israel, never happened that a member of the Knesset was suspended for 6 months, which, as far as I remember, that's the longest term of suspension that's possible.
And not just suspended, Ben Gvir, who you've mentioned, the security minister, the fascist, he said you shouldn't just be suspended, you should be deported to Syria, I think is the phrase he used. That's insane language.
Yes, but it's very common, It's not the first time that he used such terms and such phrases against us, not only me, but all of us, especially in Hadash Ta'al, the faction. He's been saying that over and over again, and he's not the only one. I mean, other members of his own faction and of the Likud, very often say the same. They call us systematically, terror sympathizers and supporters, that we must be deported, etc., etc. Unfortunately, that's the common parlance in Israeli society.
And he's saying that about not just an Israeli Palestinian, an Israeli Jew, he's saying should be deported from Israel. Sam Bahor, who is Palestinian, he messages saying, hi, Ofer from Palestine. You are our true neighbor. It's constantly reported that the Israeli citizens are not seeing what's happening in Gaza. Could that really be possible, he says? Could that be a given Israel is highly connected to the entire world? Because I've heard this as well, Ofer, that people in Israel, when they switch on the evening news, they're not seeing the deaths in Gaza. They're not seeing starving children. They're not seeing rubble. They're seeing what, they're being given only nationalist, militaristic propaganda. But surely they must see online what's happening.
Look, first of all, the media in Israel has turned, unfortunately, I lament it very much, of course, turned itself voluntarily rather than by pressure from above, turned itself voluntarily into a collaborator of the government as far as the genocide in Gaza is concerned. And as far as any kind of, war or attacks in Lebanon, in the West Bank, etc., as far as those are concerned, the media, apart from very small portion of journalists, actually turned itself into a collaborator of the government. And indeed, an Israeli who watches solely the Israeli channels, and reads solely Hebrew newspapers, apart from Haaretz, are not aware of what's going on in Gaza. But I believe, I haven't investigated it, but I believe that most of the people, first, don't want to know. And second, because it's very hard to see a villain in the mirror. Nobody wants to see a villain in the mirror. This is one thing. The second thing, those who cannot watch or see or read or hear about those atrocities in the Israeli newspaper, you are totally correct. They probably know about it by reading or watching the social network and other channels, international newspapers, etc. Those who don't mind, as it were, to know. But I believe that some of them really don't care. You mentioned before thousands of people who unfortunately celebrate that. And so in the bottom line, I believe, unfortunately, that still the hegemonic view is, and this is part of the hegemonic view, of course, the hegemonic view is not exactly ours.
So Robert Holder, and many people are asking, and please, thank you for asking your questions. I'm literally going through them. There's a lot of questions in the chat, but a lot of people are asking the same question about what is the end game? What do you think is going to happen next? Robert Holder asks, what is Bibi's end game, for example? Is the idea to continue the war in perpetuity to preserve his political standing? Meanwhile, in a related question, where has it gone? Eric Winter asks, how can people in Israel even continue to support the incredibly corrupt Netanyahu?
The second question is the $1 billion question, because it's very hard to answer it. There is a continuous, brainwash and incitement. There is the poisoning machine, as it is called here, of Netanyahu and his collaborators. And they actually have succeeded in poisoning the Israeli society more than ever. And millions of people are still supporters of Netanyahu or other thugs within the coalition. According to the polls, if there were elections now, the Likud would have still be the largest party in the parliament. It is true that the coalition in general would not have been, the biggest half, as it were, but the Likud itself, under Netanyahu, according to the polls, is still the biggest party. Now, I think there are two main issues here. First is that there's no alternative. If you watch the so-called opposition, apart from us, Yair Lapid, the chairperson of the opposition, and Benjamin Gantz, who is supposed to be the alternative prime minister, they are not an alternative at all. They don't pose any alternative. This is one thing. And people understand that, and because of that, they go to the origin.
What do you think about the first question? What is Netanyahu's end goal?
Look, Netanyahu is interested only about his own good. I've been saying that for many, many years, that even before the massacre of the October 7th and the ongoing genocide and atrocities, etc., years ago, I said that he was a psychopath. And I do believe he is. He doesn't care about anyone. He doesn't care about the well-being and lives of the hostages, the Israeli hostages. He doesn't care. He sacrifices them knowingly. He also, by the way, sacrifices the Israeli soldiers as cannon fodder. He doesn't care. He wants to be in power, first because he's in love with power. Secondly, because he's terrified. He's a coward. He's terrified of being behind bars as he should be. But he actually surrounded himself with fascist messianic thugs. Some of them, I think, pathologically insane. They do believe that the blood of both Palestinians and Israelis is the red carpet of the Messiah. And they want to realize the so-called decisive plan that Smotrich introduced in 2017. In a nutshell, if I have the time to explain, in a nutshell, the decisive or subjugation plan, it depends on the translation, boils down to 3 points. First, that Israel must annex the all occupied Palestinian territories without granting basic rights to the Palestinians, which is official apartheid. Secondly, those Palestinians who are not going to accept their fate or their status as subjects are going to be expelled from their homeland. And third, those Palestinians who are going to resist this apartheid and oppression are going to be killed. This plan is the real reason behind, by the way, the coup d'etat that the government tried to pursue under the sugar-coated term judicial reform before the massacre of October. And now, under the auspices or under the smokescreen of the massacre in Gaza, they still pursue the very same plan. That's the strategy.
So you mentioned annexation. Mira Husseini in our Q&A asks, will Donald Trump allow Israel to annex the West Bank? Miriam Adelson gave him $100 million. And if he does, surely, Mira says, the world's legal and political bodies will step in. I'm not sure which bodies those are. But what do you think is going to happen under a Trump presidency?
I'm very pessimistic, but it's not that Biden was a great help, you know. I mean, to say the least, for over a year, Biden's administration and Biden himself actually practically supported the massacre in Gaza, either materially by arming Israel, etc., or diplomatically by veto, for instance, decisions of the Security Council. So in that sense, I think that Trump is not going to be worse because that was bad enough. The one thing that I'm afraid of, given the administration that Trump apparently is going to form, that they are going to support the annexation plan. I mean, look at those that he nominated as the ambassador to Israel, as the Secretary of State, etc. They are all not pro-Israelis. They are pro the Israeli fascism. And those are not the same. We have to distinguish between the interests of the Israelis, which I endorse, and the interest of the fascists in Israel, including the government.
So on the subject of the fascists, many of whom want to not just rebuild settlements in Gaza, but you saw a recent headline in I think it was the Jerusalem Post, talking about southern Lebanon actually being northern Israel. And Reem Chalan asks, there are some in Israeli society who claim that parts of Lebanon belong to Israel. Do you believe that the Israeli government is attacking Lebanon to pave the way for creating settlements south of the Litani River, as it's doing now, as it's planning on doing now, I guess, in northern Gaza?
Look, with those bigots, you can never tell. At the moment, I don't think so. And I don't think so, not because they are not interested in doing so, but because they themselves understand that it's not realistic. I surely hope, as I just read, and heard in the media just a couple of hours ago, that we are just, that just around the corner, there is an agreement to finish, not only to cease fire, but to reach an agreement regarding the north and stopping this terrible, deadly war. The Lebanese people who were deported from their homes and lands should come back home. And the Israelis, who over a year have been neglected by this government, by the way, and could not go back to their lands and homes, should be back home as well. I hope it is just around the corner, and that those, crazy dreams, which are in fact nightmares, of settling in Lebanon are not going to materialize at all. And I hope and believe not.
So a lot of our subscribers in the chat are asking about 2 states versus 1 state. Why is it you don't support a 1-state solution? In fact, Philip Heisman, hope I'm not butchering his last name. Philip says, I'm curious, Ofer, how you can imagine the transition could happen from what you call ethnocracy to a part of a healthier modern state that exists alongside a Palestinian state. Could such a transformation actually happen, especially given the fascistic turn of the last decade? And I would add to Philip, if your argument is Israel right now is an ethnocracy, then just having a Palestinian state next door is not going to help the Palestinians living in Israel or leftists such as yourself. What is the argument, as someone like yourself who believes in secularism, who believes in equality, what is the argument against, apart from the practical concerns, but just in theory, what is the argument against having 1 state between the river and the sea that is a democratic, multi-faith, multicultural, secular state for everyone living there as equals? What's the argument against that?
Had the things that you just described were realistic, I would endorse that. I have no problem at all, ideologically speaking. I have no problem at all with such a scenario you just sketched. The problem is that it is unrealistic. And I think that 1 state, we are dealing here about more than 100 years of terrible hostility, bloodshed, oppression, occupation, dispossession, etc., etc. Without getting to the question who is responsible, whose guilt it is, etc., etc. That's the fact. Does someone really believe that you can just wipe out in 1 day all those years and form a real stable democratic state? I wish it was possible. I wish. I think it is not. So
but do you think 2 states are possible? But do you think a 2-state solution is possible? Because some people would say a 2-state solution is not possible either.
And I explain why.
Please.
2-state solution is possible, first and foremost, because the Palestinian people is entitled to its own statehood and self-determination, which it never enjoyed. I think that first and foremost, the Palestinian people under occupation in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem are entitled to their own statehood. And they are entitled to live freely and equally in a sovereign Palestinian state with no oppression and no occupation. At the same time, for sure, I am a socialist. For sure, all citizens within Israel, including, of course, the 21% Palestinian, Arab Palestinians of the Israeli citizenry, should enjoy total and full equality as well. In that sense, our struggle as Hadash has mainly, as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned, has mainly 2 main issues. One is the liberation of the Palestinian people via their own independent state, and democratization of the state of Israel. But the 2 are mutually dependent.
Okay. Quick question.
The liberation, had I have the time, I could explain. I actually derive many of these analyses from things that Lenin wrote 100 years ago in regard to the question of national self-determination.
Well, while we're on the subject of people from 100 years ago, there's a man named Theodor Herzl who came up with Zionism. Do you consider yourself to be a Zionist, Ofer?
I am a clear and explicit anti-Zionist, always have been since I remember myself.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. Geraldine Griffin, we're running out of time. A lot of people want a forward-looking conversation right now. Geraldine Griffin asked, and I wish I could take all your questions. We've got dozens and dozens of questions in the chat. Geraldine Griffin says, here in Europe, we march, protest, fundraise, hold events, support BDS. What else can we do?
I think that in order to succeed in our struggle for liberation, equality, and justice for all, for Palestinians and Israelis alike, I think 3 things should be met. One is that we will have within the parliament in Israel an opposition. Let's start with that. Secondly, that we will see in the streets of Israel millions of people against the government and against the genocide. And third, a real and serious international pressure on the Israeli government. Without the third element, we have no chance. Now, by saying that we have no chance is not only that the genocide, the terrible death toll of Palestinians and of children, I mean, it's unbearable. It's unbearable. You know, my family on my mother's side, all of them, apart from my grandparents who left Poland before the Nazi occupation, nobody survived. All of them were killed by the Nazis. And I do not compare to the Holocaust, but I think all the time about the children mainly, the children who are killed on a daily basis, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. Damn it. So
Yes, it's
we
painful. Let
it's
me ask you this.
so
You say
we
nobody
need the
cares.
international community. We need the international
Yes.
community to put much more pressure on their own governments. We need it. But at the same time, I want to be very, very frank and blunt. You must stand against anti-Semitism at the same time. If you struggle for Palestinian liberation and it is the just cause, but you collaborate with anti-Semites and you do not stand firm against anti-Semitism, it's not only that you do something which is not justifiable, but you also cause harm to the struggle.
Well said. Ted Hasan actually asks, or Hazen, apologies, Ted, do Jewish Israelis feel safer now than they felt a few weeks or months into the Israeli response to October the 7th? I think that's a great question. Is there even a sense
Absolutely not.
that the killing of this mass killing of Palestinian kids has made people in your country safe? Do they think they're safe?
Absolutely not. And as I said before, or implied, the continuation of the attacks, of the vicious attacks, deadly, murderous attacks on Gaza and Lebanon and even West Bank has nothing to do with the security of the Israelis. Nothing at all. It has everything to do with this messianic bigotry that I mentioned before. That's the only motivation and only cause. Nothing to do with security, nothing at all. And the consequence, of course, is that the Israelis, Jews and Palestinians, are not secured at all. The death toll among Israelis, among, by the way, many Palestinian citizens in Israel, in the north, from missiles shot by Hezbollah, is quite high, of course, very far from the massacre that goes on in Gaza, but still, each and every human being is the whole world, you know, for someone like myself who believe in humanism. But nobody is secured.
And Scott Scowcroft asks, cutting to the chase, is Ofer optimistic or pessimistic about the future? And did that change once Trump was elected?
There's a great book by the Palestinian citizen of Israel, Emil Habibi, called The Optimist, which is a combination of optimism and pessimism. So although he meant something else, I will endorse the term in order to explain or to describe my view. It comes from another Marxist philosopher, Antonio Gramsci, who said more or less 100 years ago that a good socialist must cling to pessimism of the intellect, but at the same time for optimism of the will. So I try to follow him.
It's a great line from Gramsci. In fact, Shagufta asks a similar question. What hope do you have? Watching from halfway across the world for over 400 days, it's hard not to lose hope, she says.
It is true. That's one of the reasons why so many people who do believe that the genocide is terrible and must stop do not take the streets. They are desperate. You know that the immigration out of Israel in 2023, first because of the coup, and afterwards because of the genocide, the massacre committed by Hamas, the genocide in Israel, etc., the immigration out of Israel raised in 60% last year. People are desperate. So it's very, very difficult to be hopeful. And you know what? Almost literally, every day that I open my eyes, I feel desperate too and hopeless. But it takes me a few minutes to understand that I must wake up, stand on my feet and fight. Otherwise, it's a lost cause. We should never, ever, ever lose hope, because once we lose hope, we are not going to struggle. We cannot afford that.
And you actually, I was going to ask you a question from Mohammed Latif asking about how many Israelis have left the country, but you talked about the emigration. People are leaving as well. Let me ask you one last question. You made we're out of time, unfortunately, folks. Thank you so much for your questions. We've had a lot of questions in the chat. This has been one of our most subscribed chats. People want to hear from you, Ofer. So let me ask you this. You said you're never going to stop fighting. You are suspended from the parliament for 6 months. You've been suspended before. When you get back into the parliament in 6 months' time, are you going to change anything you're saying or doing?
No. As I said in the beginning of our chat, I am committed to the people who voted for me, for us, and I am committed to the values I believe in. Once I bow myself, in front of those who persecute us, and at the expense of my values and my struggle for those values and my public, then I have no right to stay as a member of the Knesset. If something like that happens, I have to quit.
We will watch and see what happens, Ofer. We are truly grateful for you taking time out to speak with us today, to speak with Zeteo.
My pleasure and honor.
And we're great admirers of the stance you've taken in the Middle East's only democracy, standing up against genocide, even at your own political cost. Thank you for taking time out today, Ofer Cassif. Stay safe. Thank you all for watching at home. There's several hundred of you on this Zoom town hall, dozens of you asking questions. Please tell your friends. Yes, and thank you from me and from Ofer. Please tell your friends to subscribe to Zeteo. We need more paid subscribers. We need to make the company bigger, make the movement bigger, have these important conversations with important figures around the world like Ofer Cassif. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.